Good afternoon. I'd like to call to order the Public Works Finance and Safety Committee meeting of Monday, May 6th, 2019. The first item on the agenda is approval of the consent agenda. Is there a motion and second for approval? So moved. Moved by Manti, second by Bueller. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. The second item is public input, and this is the time for people to talk about whatever they want. See none, we'll move on. Item 3 is approval of the agenda, and I would like to move item number 4 to fall after number 8 in the arrangement, and that will become clear when we get there. So with that change, is there a motion and second for approval of the agenda? Moved by Bueller, second by Y. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. Okay, the next item is council consideration of a bid award for the Parkview Drive Street Reconstruction, Project 1905 to Dunnick, Inc. in the amount of $198,601.39. And I will ask Heath to explain this to us.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of council. Good evening. This particular item, we recently bid, and the bids came in a little bit higher, about 5% higher than the engineer's estimate, and a total cost of, let me see, I think it was roughly 16 grand over the budgeted amount, 16,100 over the budgeted amount. These improvements are generally rebuilding this portion of roadway of Parkview Drive, and also adding a new on-street bike lane that would be connected to this street paving. And I guess generally speaking, where the budget came with the budget amount that we have, and what we're going to talk about subsequently in the meeting here on how we're wanting to do some light item transfers for some work in our current year budget that we're not going to perform because of where our bids have come in on these other projects. The engineering staff is comfortable in recommending approval of this bid and moving forward with these improvements.
Thank you, Heath. Could you explain the trail component of this project, please?
Yes, if I could have call on the Assistant City Engineer, Colin, to walk through that on the screen with you as far as the trail configuration and how that'll be constructed.
Here we go. All right, so this does include a bike trail portion. Currently, the design is shown for an 8-foot bike path along the south portion of Parkview Drive here, and then it comes up along the east side of Parkview Drive, and it connects into the path, currently into the park.
Is it 10 feet on that north-south section?
No, it will be 8 foot all the way.
The whole thing is 8?
Correct. And then it gets into a 10-foot section inside the park. Currently, if we did not widen the roadway by approximately 4.5 feet, that would not allow for an adequate bike lane. So we did this not only for safety of pedestrians and bike riders, we did it for functionality reasons. We did go out there multiple times. We made a hard decision to widen that. It does make some of the area tight, but we are still within the right-of-way. We found it necessary on the engineering staff level to widen this roadway about 4.5 feet.
So even though the trail itself is 8 feet wide, the road's only being widened 4.5 feet.
Yes.
It's not being widened 8 feet to add a 8-foot wide trail.
Correct. So we'll still have 2 travel lanes, one east, one west, and then one north and one south. And then it will still allow for the adequate 8-foot bike.
Yeah, and so that was a compromise. Normally, a bike trail will be 10 feet wide.
Yes.
We did make it just as narrow as we could. We didn't want to go any narrower than 8. And it is immediately adjacent to the road surface, so,
Yes, it is. It's going to look as one. We'll try to stripe it so there is a distinct difference there, but it is all one.
right. And that's not normally our first choice of how to do it, but with limited right-of-way, we did keep the trail entirely within public right-of-way. And we do have other sections of trail that are immediately adjacent to the roadway where we have to do that, so.
Yep.
Madam Mayor, the council mentioned the striping too. I think that's an important component of a on-street bike trail where you have a little bit wider white edge line. And then they also have those bike lane symbols too that are commonly used to identify that it's clearly for bicyclists, pedestrian use.
Okay. And this does include the little pigtail that will connect the existing paved trail in Memorial Park to the paved road surface of Parkview Drive.
Yes, it
Right.
does.
Okay. Any questions? Councilman Y?
I have a couple questions. So then at the end of Parkview, then the bike path stops, right? It doesn't connect to anything on the other side?
On the west portion, currently, this project will, that'll be the terminating point, I guess, of the bike trail. However, our future phases will connect that.
And then the next one, is it right up against the road? So how will that affect parking on the road for vehicles?
Yes. They will not be able to park on the road surface itself anymore on that side. They'll still be able to park on the north side, but unfortunately you can't block just like a sidewalk, you can't block it with your car.
And I'm assuming there's probably not a lot of vehicles that park there?
I did not see one vehicle parked along the road while we were out there multiple times.
And people will park from time to time along the side of the road when they have visitors. And if you can kind of see on that, I think there are 3 driveways that are affected on the south side. That 4th driveway is very long, and that shouldn't affect them at all. There still will be adequate room to park on the driveway between the garage and the bike trail in those 3 driveways, which are short. But people coming to visit it who might normally park on the road right there in front of their house would have to go to the other side of the street. And that's the same as these other locations where we have a bike trail adjacent to the road.
Also, the driveways on the south will still be longer than the driveways on the north side. So people are parking on that north side just fine. It shouldn't adversely affect the people in the south.
Are the homeowners aware of that?
They are, yes.
Okay.
Councilman Vilhauer?
I just like to make a comment that I know Councilman Albertson and I have been reached out to by some of the homeowners along there, but I do want to assure everybody that there was input received through the entire process. There was public meetings held, so I mean, yes, they are aware of it. They don't like having to give up some right of way, which people tend to perceive that as being their property, but it is right of way. So I do want to make the point that there was a public process and input solicited all through this entire process for the last year and a half or longer.
Thank you. That's a good point. Councilman Danforth?
Yeah, I've got a couple questions. First of all, I think the fact that it's on the side of the road, we all know that's not ideal, but I don't think there's a lot of traffic in there along that area. I go by there all the time. There's just not a lot. So I think that's going to be okay there. But how does this plan differ from the original plan 2 years, 3 years ago?
And maybe the mayor can help me out on this one if I misspeak at all. But the original plan actually was taking all of the right-of-way, and they were putting the bike path along the right-of-way line, which would actually have taken their whole driveway essentially. And that's why I don't think it was moved forward with at that point. So that's why we kind of looked at it a little bit differently.
Okay, so would it have taken a 10-foot width instead of the 4.5?
And probably even a little more, because I think at that time, John, can you remember that? You were involved with that. Wasn't there actually a little buffer strip between the road and the trail then? So it was about 12 to 14 feet that they were coming in, if I remember right.
Yeah, it was about 2 foot was.
Yeah, 2-foot buffer and then a 10-foot trail.
My next question is, since this is a project, since this is a project that we're looking at as a street project, are the costs of this trail included in our trail costs, or are they included in the road costs, when normally we would budget them separately?
The trails portion will come out of our trails budget.
And this will help with the trail costs as well, just because we're doing it all together, so we're getting a little bit better pricing. Out of that budget that you saw, the 198,000, approximately 52,500 will be direct trail costs.
And along those lines, Councilman Danforth, this combining of certain segments of work throughout town and certain projects is another thing I'll touch on briefly at the end of our meeting here in the short presentation I have regarding project funding. But that's really a step we've been trying to make throughout this construction season, and we're a little bit behind the 8 ball with it, so we're having to amend things as we've gotten into the bid process by combining work and trying to get a little more economy of scale to our bids. Exactly along the lines of what we're trying to do here, combining this pathway with, of course, in this case, constructability. It's a necessity that it be bid together because the physically being connected to the street paving. But those are some aspects that we're looking at and trying to gain some efficiencies.
And then also to answer Councilman Wise' question, when we get on the west side of the old 139 where we connect, that would be the connecting point to that phase 3 where we got that 400,000 transportation alternative grant, and that's one of the requirements, that there is connectivity to get that grant. So,
Any other questions or comments? All right, I'll look for a recommendation then. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. Thank you. Item number 6 is council consideration of a bid award for the Downtown Alley Reconstruction Project number 1907 to Crestone Builders, Inc. in the amount of $111,617.26. I'll look for a motion second for approval. Moved by Bueller, second by Manti. And Heath, please explain this one too.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. This bid amount of $111,000 was actually 4% lower than the engineer's estimate. However, we did only have $75,000 budgeted for our downtown alley project this year, so that puts it at $36,000 over budget. These are approximate numbers, of course. Again, with project cost savings by work we're anticipating not doing this year, this is another overrun that we anticipate funding with the monies that we will be saving by not performing other work. The nature of this alleyway, and if Colin could pull up that diagram in the attachments for me, or Pete maybe, either way.
It's up.
It's a T to alley section where we felt it was imperative to perform work on both of these sections within the same project. The way it's configured, it didn't really make sense to parse out some of this work to get within that $75,000 budget. And again, just with the reprioritization of our workload this year and project work that we will not be performing, we do have adequate funds to cover this overrun.
All right. Are there any questions? Councilman Y?
I think there's a lot of utilities up in that area. Will they be involved, and then
Yes.
will they bury those? Or
Yeah, it's great question, Councilman. There was close coordination with Watertown Municipal Utilities on this, and was actually one of the driving factors in why we're doing the work on these alleys. It was in direct relation to the work that the electric department is planning on doing. And of course, we like to correlate that so that we're not coming in after the matter or having them temporary pave things, or we have to go out and tear it up a year later to repave it. So we're gaining efficiencies that way too.
Councilman Danforth?
This is maybe a Kristen question or whomever, but deals with all of us. But how did we budget $75,000 but yet had an engineering estimate of $116,000?
I can answer that. The engineering estimate for the budget is done before the project's designed.
Oh,
That was
So
done
we
last
guessed on
summer.
that one.
Yeah,
And then when the detail came through, this is where.
Right.
Okay. Is concrete right now, because it would appear like concrete isn't being as affected as much as anything with asphalt. Is that a fair statement, based on the bids?
Colin, do you have knowledge of that based on your observations that these numbers have come in? I don't think it's been as big of an increase as the asphalt. I don't know without looking whether, previous couple of years' prices, how much of a difference it's been on concrete, but I doubt it's been as much as the asphalt increase has.
Yeah, the asphalt directly correlates with oil prices, so as that goes up, asphalt does go up, whereas concrete, there's less factors involved on the world market than oil, so.
other questions? Councilwoman Manti?
Oh, I just wanted to make a comment in support of fixing that entire T of that intersection. I just, that's been a tough one all along, and I think I just want to throw my hat in for that's a good thing to do.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? All right, I'll look for a recommendation. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. Thank you. Item 7 is council consideration of a bid award for the sanitary sewer rehabilitation project number 1908 to HydroClean LLC in the amount of $229,637.09. I'll look for a motion second for approval. So moved. Moved by Councilman Y and second by Albertson. Heath, please tell us about this one.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is a 604 fund, or one of our enterprise funds in the sanitary sewer department. And the engineering office obviously helps prepare this bid every year for the sanitary sewer replacement. We perform this work in alternating years on what we call a more conventional replacement, where we're trenching and replacing pipe. And then in the opposite year, we will do what they call an in situ or an in-place sewer lining project. This year happens to be our sewer lining project. We've got multiple locations, mainly in kind of the older downtown area, which we typically find those pipes are fitting for a lining project. This type of lining usually works pretty well if you've got adequate grade, good grade on your old pipe, and the old pipe isn't broke up or damaged dramatically to where you can slip line this pipe and you essentially end up on the interior of the pipe ends up being brand new, like new piece of pipe would. But you do have to have good sound structure of the carrier pipe that you're placing this liner into. So all these areas, they get videoed through the sewer department, and they work with engineering staff to find some prioritized locations on where this work would be performed. This bid did come in, I believe, under budget, which was good for the 604 fund. And also to note, we will be performing work out at some of the structures or vaults out around the lake. There's a series of underground structures out there that have quite a bit of groundwater influence on them, and those vaults house certain metering or instrumentation that are critical to the sewer collection system out around the lake. And so we're including this project with the same company, some grout repairs to those structures to prevent that groundwater from infiltrating into those underground structures.
Would you say a little bit about the schedules that you're not recommending award of?
Yes, absolutely. We included two of the city facilities, city-owned facilities, I should say. One of them being the county museum, and the other one being the auditorium. Those two facilities have known sewer service line issues that we feel might be a prime candidate for lining in order to correct their issues. The pricing came in rather high for those two structures to be included in this contract, so we're not recommending award for those. However, we would like to move forward and explore some, by getting the televising or the video of those sewer laterals done in-house, or ordered, excuse me, we would order the work internally, but through a local company that also provides televising service. Our sewer department's camera can't get into these sewer service lines. They're just too small for the equipment that they have. But we believe there might be some local options to get them televised. And then once we have the information on hand that shows what kind of condition they're in, we could probably better estimate, or have the contractor even better estimate an actual cost for doing this work. I think moving into it under this bid, there was a little bit too many unknowns, so the contractor priced their bid accordingly and kind of priced it out of the ballpark for us to want to do it under this bid. So we're not recommending those options B or C, just a base bid, Schedule A for award.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions or comments? Councilman Danforth?
So are we going to move forward?
If you'll
With
see,
the-
those last two bid schedules are not being recommended.
Right, but are we going to move forward with the visual evaluation?
We're going to try.
Okay.
We didn't feel the bid that we got from them, they're clearly saying they don't want the work.
Yeah.
When they bid $1,200 a foot for something that normally is in the $50 to $150 range, they really don't want to do it unless we twist their arm super hard. So I think that's because they don't know what they're going to find. And I also think that we have local contractors who can do the camera work. We're going to keep looking. Yes, Councilman Roby.
Just a comment. I sometimes like to see these split bids like this for this very reason. When you break parts, things like this out, because in the case we only got one bid, we want to have an honorable bid system. Hopefully it's competitive, we can take it. But when you break it apart like that, that obviously gives us some cover on that. And I think that's a good deal. I want to make that comment. And why do you do that? This is why you do it.
Exactly. Thank you. Anyone else? All right, I'll look for action. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. Thank you. Item 8 is council consideration of a bid award for the Foundation Fields Improvements, project number 1911, to Dunick, Inc. in the amount of $30,862.50. I'll look for a motion and second for approval. Moved by Vilhauer. Second by everybody, Bueller. And I'll ask Keith to tell us about this one.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, another one of our parks-related improvements projects out here at Foundation Fields, and this pardon me, trying to find my notes here quick. The amount that this one was over. Do you have that readily available there, Colin?
I do. It came in approximately 20% higher than the engineer's estimate, but it did come in under budget by about $5,000.
So this one's pretty straightforward. We're doing some street improvements for the roadway that is in the park vicinity, and that includes some of the asphalt road and gravel roads that's located in the Foundation Fields Park area. So there's some excavation, asphalt, some removals and patching and things of that nature associated with this, along with a little bit of sidewalk work as well.
All right, are there any questions? Councilman Vilhauer.
Heath, when we say asphalt road, are we talking about the parking lot in the south end of Foundation? Is that the road, or what are, fill me on what we're talking about out there?
Yeah, I'll defer to Colin on the details of that design.
I do not believe it's the parking lot. It's just the internal road into it, and then the adjacent sidewalks.
Yes, this is the internal roads from the parking lots on both the south and the east sides to bring them to the concession building. Upgrading those.
Some of it's paved currently and some of it's gravel, and it's
It-
all going to be paved when we're done?
Well, there's not much gravel, but the east is almost down to gravel. It's the coming in from the east. It's pretty bad. So just get that improved and upgraded, and then kind of a little bit of sidewalk that's going to go to the shelter area there.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? All right, I'll look for action. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. Thank you. Item number 9 is, oh no, we're going to move to the council consideration of capital improvement funding, which Heath has a little bit of a presentation prepared.
I do, Madam Mayor. And Colin, if I could have you pull it up over there, this computer I just found does not have PowerPoint, so I'll present it from over there. Colin should be able to pull it up. It's on the G drive. So, Madam Mayor, members of council, it's just a few simple slides here I wanted to put together in relation to our project funding, particularly as it relates to our street improvements and our street improvement projects in the 212 CIP fund, the capital improvement plan that the city implements every year in their budget. So as we've noted throughout the bid awards, both last meeting and this meeting, we've got numerous projects that have ran over budget. And that's, of course, sparked concern with the engineering department, but also with the finance office and with the mayor. And we've had discussions on how to move forward appropriately in balancing those numbers out so that we can do so in a calculated manner. This slide here represents some of the projects from this year that did run over. You'll see in the right column the overages from a number of those projects. And what I wanted to point out tonight, as far as the projects we were not going to be performing, are the bottom 2 rows here. And this is the trade-off that we're seeing and the decision-making that we're having to make in how to fund our projects. The conditions of our streets and the necessity of these projects that did run over, again, we felt were warranted to go ahead and carry out the performance of those projects through to completion.
Excuse me just a sec. Colin, could you hit the lights? It's hard to read those numbers. Go back and turn the light off. Okay, thanks. Wrong one.
Thank you, Rob. Rob, too, by the way, the street superintendent, very critical in the discussions that we've been having with these street-related projects and how we're prioritizing the work and what should be carried through and what we can put off. But I wanted to just share this slide mainly to point out those $200,000 amounts at the bottom of that chart there that include 3rd Avenue Northeast box culvert replacement that was originally budgeted for this year's budget at $135,000. What we decided to do there was kind of revamp the design of that project. This was initiated sometime before me coming on board with the city, and it was prioritized to put in a replacement box culvert at that area. This is kind of northeast of, is it Dakota Dunes subdivision?
Yes, Dakota Commons.
Dakota Commons, sorry.
That's a little soft.
Yeah, yeah. Northeast of the Dakota Commons, just as a point of reference, is where this, and it's on a gravel road there, where the city has partial ownership of a portion of the right-of-way because of our pathway that goes through there. So it's a very unique location. We decided to instead look at just simply replacing the culverts that are there. They are in need of replacement. We've inspected them. There's holes in the culverts at the joints and the old pipe that's there. And worn through the corrugated metal. So there is a need there, but not to the extent we didn't feel at this time to go forward with a robust project like a box culvert construction. So we think we can address the issue while still saving $100,000 towards projects this year. by simply replacing the culverts with RCP, reinforced concrete pipe, and maybe even some internal workforces that Rob's not aware of yet. But we'll have to see how that pans out. But the second one is the Roby Creek drainage improvements. We had earmarked this year $100,000 for work in the Roby Creek drainage basin. It's not clear what the original $100,000 was exactly intended for. Now, in considering this money through this year's design and planning phases, we've been able to come up with a handful of areas of Roby Creek drainage basin that could use some work, some potential concrete channels in the drainage ways, and things like that would make the maintenance of that upper part of Roby Creek a lot more friendlier for the streets department that performs a lot of that maintenance. However, because there wasn't a specific task set forth in that budget, we did feel that this money could be reallocated entirely towards these overruns, these project overruns, which helps prevent the amount that we're having to claim, potentially supplement the budget from our unreserved fund balance. And that, it was kind of the target in how we decided to pull these two $100,000 amounts and trying to keep the amount we're supplementing from the unreserved fund balance as low as possible. And so engineering worked with finance and of course the mayor, and we felt it was appropriate to do so, and using this $200,000 towards these overruns this year. You'll see also on this chart in the sorry about that. The two purple boxes there. This is new work that was not budgeted for in 2019. It's new work that's came up particularly after a unique winter season as well. As everybody knows, as you've driven around town this spring, there seems to be a feel on the roads of a lot more potholes and damage than what we've usually seen in the past after any given winter season. I can only guesstimate that that's probably attributed to a lot of the moisture that this winter season brought. Moisture is a roadway's worst enemy by far. You want to keep moisture out and away from our roads, and you want to have them designed appropriately so that you do that. Now, some of these roads in these two areas, unfortunately, don't quite have the adequate base course that they need, and they do not have edge drains installed at the edge of the roadway. And so the moisture has taken a toll on these roads, and these prices, I'll note too, we established to propose potential additional work this year, and we wanted the council and the mayor and the finance office to contemplate whether we add these projects in. Both of these locations would take budget supplement of those amounts that you see in purple, the $189,000 for additional work in Northridge, and the $280,000 approximate number for the Conradi addition, which is to reconstruct 17th Street Northeast. Now, with that being said, I'll show you some of the conditions that we're dealing with. This is Northridge that we're looking at here. Some of the pictures on the additional streets we would like to add in Northridge on 17th Avenue Northeast and on 7th Street Northeast. As you can see, there's a lot of alligator cracking, what we'd call alligator cracking, and deterioration in the roadway surface. You can see on 17th there's been several patches performed in the past, which indicates that this road hasn't failed overnight. It's been failing over time, and it's only getting worse. But these are two critical roadways that the Streets Department and Engineering Department kind of came together on as what we've been calling an emergency road repair. Putting these off for another season, it would probably be very detrimental to these neighborhoods because they'd be in a lot more dire straits come next season than they are this year even. These are some photos from the Conradi addition. This is 17th Street Northeast, and you see a lot of the similar deterioration on these roads as we did in the Northridge addition. And if you look at these and you envision this being your neighborhood, and maybe it is for some folks, but these streets are becoming to a point where they really do need some attention. I included the one on the picture on the right because you see all the water in the curb line. And again, that's just, I felt that was a good picture that captured some of the driving factors behind these conditions. Like I mentioned before, is the water, the drainage issues that we see in some of these subdivisions, and whether or not these streets, well, we know that when they were constructed that they don't have some of the necessary improvements to mitigate water from damaging the streets and getting a full life cycle out of them. So in these reconstruction projects, what we are doing is putting in edge drain, otherwise known as drain tile, along the front of the curb in these street sections. And we're also making sure we have an adequate depth of base course to help collect that moisture out from under the road, convey it out to that drain tile, and let it flow out and away from the street to help mitigate the issues that are often caused by the presence of water underneath the roadway surface. This is a chart out of our IMS study. IMS is the consultant that performed our pavement management system study here a few years back. And I thought this was valuable in this discussion, and particularly looking at the budget amounts that we have on this chart. What this chart represents, how do we get a pointer on up here? Is there on the, do you know, Pete?
You can use the pointer, the little remote pointer has a laser pointer on it.
Will that work? Okay, click back one slide. Did that pull up on the screen? There it is. Perfect. There, that way it's on the video record too. But what this chart represents is this curve here is if we were to take, well, here I'll start on the axis of the chart. These are the pavement condition index scale. We're starting at 50, it goes as low as 0, but all the way up to 100. The average of the city's pavement condition index throughout town is a little bit over 60. The pavement condition index is kind of self-explanatory. It's describing the condition of the pavement based on this number, and there's a lot of technical data that goes into how that condition index is established, but it has a lot to do with the remaining life of the pavement and the current deterioration that it's seen and the distresses that are on those pavement sections. So currently, right now, we're sitting fairly decent for citywide pavement condition index at, we're in the good condition. If you look at this chart on the left, it gives the PCI, or the pavement condition index, and these ratings and their corresponding condition as they'd be categorized. So on an average, we're sitting about at good. But as you notice, when you drop below there, the 50 mark is fair, 40 is marginal. I'll note the Ginstead Edition roadways, their pavement condition indexes came in at about 44 for the work that we're doing this year. So they're in that marginal range to where they need to be repaired. What this chart did is it took into account all the needs for the city streets community-wide based on their current pavement condition index and said, okay, city, here's what you would need to spend in order to get your streets as a whole constructed up to a higher pavement condition index. And where we're at right now, Watertown's current budget is approximately $2.4 million per year that we spend on street repairs alone. Now, that's a lot different than the full CIP budget number is, and but on average, we're spending about $2.4 million per year on street work. You can see the recommended budget showed back in 2016 when this chart was created was to spend about $3.6 million per year, and that puts us on this green dotted line. Where we're spending now is the green solid line. You'll notice the next line below that is a steady state to keep the current PCI citywide. We'd spend $2.1 million a year. That would keep us flat line on this red line here. But obviously, the more you spend, the better condition your streets are, the higher your overall pavement condition index will be throughout the community. Now, that doesn't mean that we need to spend $41.2 million in 5 years and to have 90 rated streets throughout town. And that's not the goal, but that just is for reference to show what would need to be done in order to have, top-notch streets throughout the community. And that these subsequent numbers below there give an idea on what to spend in order to target over 5 years of spending, where you'd start to come in at as you see those improvements performed throughout the street system. So I wanted to share this chart mainly because of the budget numbers that were in it, to show that we are currently spending still about what we were in 2016, about $2.4 million on street improvements, and mainly to show too the recommended budget from this pavement management study was to spend about $3.6 million per year. So we are falling a little bit short of what's recommended. With that being said, in summary, what I wanted to hit on, and we'll have a couple talking points to go back to related to those two subdivision additional work quantities that we were debating on adding. But in summary, this discussion obviously evolves, and it kind of can go down a lot of different critical components of that discussion. What I wanted to lay out here on the last slide is that, yes, we do have the pavement management system study and all the data that it includes, and it's a very useful tool that I hope to continue to use with the street superintendent, with the assistant city engineer, on how we prioritize their work, how we look at the proposed treatments from that study. Sometimes we go out in the field and look at what their proposed treatment was and find that's not a good fit, and we need to maybe modify that, and we'll put forth what we feel is recommended for those given street sections. And there's also additional needed considerations that sometimes come up that we experience every season as these roads deteriorate. There's also estimated costs in this study, which is how they were able to establish that last chart that I showed and talked through. But then the other component here is that we're dealing with increased cost and also trying to incorporate some efficiencies as much as we can. Like I indicated earlier in tonight's meeting, combining certain projects that are in the general same vicinity to help eliminate some of the MOB costs that we pay on having all the separate localized projects that we've sometimes will run. But trying to combine those as much as we can. And all the efficiencies that we try to do doesn't usually completely offset the inflation. Inflation is always a factor that comes into play as we're dealing with oil costs this year or asphalt paving costs. So where that brings us is to funding sources. Again, from the previous chart, we're spending about $2.4 million. Should be, according to the program, spending about $3.6 to get our roads up to speed. So what are our funding sources? Well, of course, for the 212 fund, we have the second penny sales tax that's earmarked for the 212 fund, and a portion of that 212 fund goes towards our street improvements. Now, here's where we get into some bigger discussions that we're definitely not going to solve tonight, but other ideas out there that other communities are using for drainage improvements that you've seen in the previous slides. We've had to cut from this year's budget. Ways to fund drainage improvements are creating a stormwater utility. And through the creation of a stormwater utility, there then becomes revenue to address the $200,000 worth of drainage improvements that we had to strike from that spreadsheet on the earlier slide. There's also such sources of revenue as a street or curb frontage assessment, as they're known as. And this is a tool where properties throughout the community pay an assessment that go strictly towards physical maintenance to the street out in front of their property. And there are numerous communities throughout South Dakota that use both or one or the other of these two sources of revenue. I don't know as though Watertown perhaps has contemplated these sources of revenue in the past. I don't know how recent they have, of course, being new to the community. But I do know that given where we're looking at coming in our needed roadway improvements and where our current sources of revenue fall, I do think that these do make sense to have a discussion on and to explore these options as potential sources of revenue to perform these projects. I know from the calls we get in our office that the community recognizes a need for additional improvements throughout Watertown and our streets and our storm sewer systems, our drainage systems as well. And I don't want to forget about them because they are the ones that tend to take the back seat, like you saw with the $200,000 adjustments in this year's budget. So all that being said, when the budget cycle comes up this year, we'll be planning and programming projects accordingly and appropriately. But really, when we get to that point, we're making a decision on whether we can start becoming more proactive and less reactive, and including a budget that's planning and programming these projects as strategically and objectively as possible, and not just picking a number and saying, okay, go do this much dollars worth of work. We obviously want to be in the more proactive and strategic and objective level of planning and designing these projects, but we also have to deal with the reality that sometimes we do just have to set that number and say, do what you can with this much. So we'll do everything we can at the council's direction with the mayor to continue to plan and program for these projects accordingly, but just wanted to start the discussion on some of those higher level components that are very critical to our street system throughout Watertown. We gladly entertain any questions, and we should go back and revisit the Genstead edition and the Conrady edition improvements as far as what to contemplate with those. Sorry, not Genstead, but the Northridge and Conrady edition. I'll go back to that slide.
I'd be curious to know what, in 2016, what the pavement condition index was for those Northridge roads at that time. It's lower today, obviously. We've had a lot of deterioration.
I think I had that one on there.
Councilman Roby?
I'm very appreciative of the presentation this evening. I've seen a lot of DOT presentations at the state level where they're really, really data-driven, and they evaluate the roads, and there's that sweet spot you got to try and hit where you can't let a road deteriorate too much because then it's gone and you lose the road and you got to replace it early. So I'm very excited that you're going down that path. I would like to also ask a question because it comes up to us a lot, at least I've heard it a number of times, and that is that when a road fails prematurely, why does the city got to pay for it? I mean, who has to pay for that? If it wasn't constructed properly or designed properly, why does the city get stuck with that? Go back to the guy that built it or designed it. And would you comment on the process and how that works and how a road gets handed over to the city?
Yes, absolutely, Councilman Roby, Madam Mayor. So conventionally what would happen on a subdivision when it's constructed, the plans are reviewed, they're approved, the work is permitted through the engineering office. We give a permit to perform construction on certain public infrastructure components. Those can include stormwater, sanitary sewer, the streets, and then of course the water, which is managed under Watertown Municipal Utilities. But once those permits are issued, the construction commences. A point we want to get to that we haven't quite been at yet in Watertown is to have a little more of a presence during that construction phase. And that's something I've already started with this year's development projects, where we have active developments, private developments performing the construction of public infrastructure. I think it's imperative that we have a presence out there to ensure that it's being built according to the plans and specifications that were permitted. And I think at no fault of staff's, but mainly due to a lack of time, a lack of perhaps direction in some cases, a lack of staffing sources to put out there on these job sites. For whatever reason, we haven't had those checkoffs. And so I will say some of these, we did some coring out on Northridge where we cored through before we did the design because we wanted to know what we had for a street section before we put the design together on this year's projects. That coring did show that we had as little as 2 inches of pavement in some of those Northridge streets. Now, back when those were constructed, roughly the 2005 era, or 4, somewhere around there. The spec for that street section was likely 3 inches of asphalt on 9 inches of base course. We found our base course fluctuated from as little as 3 inches, and the asphalt went as little as 2 inches. And so when those streets were taken over by the city for acceptance, which is what happens after the construction is over, in an ideal process, there's a year warranty, which we stipulate now in our subdivision regulations. There's a year warranty on these subdivision improvements. The developer's engineer signs off on a certification statement verifying that they were built to meet standards and specs. However, we don't require any testing reports or anything of that nature. I've found other communities commonly require testing inspection reports for backfill and compaction testing on all the public infrastructure that went in. So that's one gap that we may want to look at filling down the road, whether we perform those tests, whether we require the developer to perform those tests. I think it's imperative to see some kind of testing to go into the construction of this so that the compaction effort and everything is met. Once it gets to that point and the checkoffs are there, we do a final walkthrough, make sure there aren't any obvious errors or omissions in the plans at the time of acceptance. And then that acceptance comes forth to council, and the year warranty transpires. If there isn't any warranty work to be done, there isn't, and it becomes ours perpetually for ownership and maintenance.
I want to make that point. Again, I appreciate the direction. I'm very glad the direction you guys are going. But once we accept it, it's our road. And I don't think the community understands that once it's built and accepted, it is now a city asset, and it's ours to deal with.
We started maybe 2015, 2014, going through the formal acceptance process for roads and trying to follow it. We do require that in our subdivision ordinance, that there's a process that's in there that hadn't been followed prior to that, and we have been making some progress in at least getting the communication going for the developer to tell the city when they think that the road is ready for acceptance, so that the city can go out and at least inspect it. And so we have done that a little bit, but we have a ways to go. Colin, you look like you want to say something.
Yes, and I just want to point out too, it's hard to get buy-in on that full, like you were saying, from the public standpoint, that road conditions change. Just like a lot of houses in town, you haven't pumped water in years or ever since you've owned it, and now people are pumping. The soil conditions change, the subsurface changes. So when those things change, that also relates to the roadway too. So you can't take into account when it's being built or immediately after. So it's harder to go beyond a year or two. Or even beyond 5 years, I'll say, for warranty reasons or anything like that.
Councilman Albertson?
I just have a question. What would you set up a Northridge, it was 2 inches of, what would the specification have asked for? I mean, I know nobody checked it, but what should it have been?
Yeah, back in the era when that was constructed, it was likely a 3-inch asphalt mat required over a 9-inch base course section. So, and there are some portions of the streets that do have 3 inches, some at 3.5, but some get as little as 2. So it kind of fluctuates as you go through the subdivision.
Councilman Vilhauer?
Question, the pavement management study was done in, 2016, is that right?
That's correct.
And we're still using or relying on that. By the same token, I've heard several references to, street conditions change, et cetera. I mean, is that 2016 study still something that we can be relying upon? I mean, just comment to that in light of some of the comments that you guys have made the last few minutes.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Councilman Vilhauer. I wouldn't at all discredit the validity of that study. It is common for a citywide pavement management program to be put in place with an initial study like we did, and then that becomes a living, breathing document that really does evolve over time. So as we perform work on the streets, that gets plugged into that program. and then the ratings for that street increase. But you are right. There are times that the program said you need to fix X, and we go out there and look, and we realize we need to fix Y instead. So there becomes that human element to it when we're out in the field and planning each year for these projects, where we do have to tweak things now and then and adjust them accordingly.
I don't think anybody does a pavement study every year. They are updated periodically, and you would expect a study to last at least 5 years and possibly even 10. I mean, 10's stretching it. And you wouldn't need to redo the whole study, maybe just do some testing. Go ahead, Councilman Whitmore.
Follow up, just also want to compliment staff for being proactive in this and bringing this to our attention and, you know, giving us some recommendations. So a compliment on that regard. Question I got, maybe it's a Matt question. The couple additional sources of revenue, for example, that you threw out, I realize any action that we take is referable, but are those fees that we as a council can assess versus having to bring them before the public for a vote?
Yes, they are referable, of course, but they are essentially treated similarly to an assessment because it would only be to property owners that would benefit from the road system, so property owners that would abut the road system. Now, if it was some sort of general tax on anybody that lived in the community, like an apartment dweller or that sort of thing, that would certainly be considered a tax and would have to be voted upon. But an assessment can be approved by the council, subject to referral.
Other questions or comments? I would like to note, this came up a little bit. The city was going down the path of establishing a stormwater utility and had retained CH2M Hill to help put that together. In 2009, it was put to bed indefinitely, but we're one of few communities that doesn't already have a stormwater utility, and we could pick up where we left off on that. Colin?
And to hit on that a little bit more is AE2S has actually contacted me in regards to this. They're currently working with Infrastructure Design Group down in Brandon, implementing this. They work hand in hand together. There's a lot that goes into this before you can really implement it, but they have contacted us in hopes that we start looking at it at least going forward. And we don't necessarily have to go with them at all. I'm not saying that, but it's kind of on everyone's radar right now because we just don't have the funding here, especially in South Dakota.
Councilman Bueller?
I got a question for you, Colin. If we did put something together like that, are there federal grants? Is there funding available to help support that if we did move forward with that? Outside funding that we wouldn't get otherwise?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, Councilman Bueller. I'm not aware of any that would open the door for us to apply for by having an assessment. You know, I do know obviously we try to make use of and exercise all the grants available right now without having this source of revenue, and we would continue to try to exercise the use of those funds as they're available through the state and the federal levels. But I'm not aware of any other resources that are opened up to us by having an assessment. But it's definitely some research we could look into just to make sure.
Also, just another quick question for you. Can we compare how we're doing in this type of thing to other communities, similar communities in South Dakota, so we can kind of see where I'm sure if every organization that does this has probably got a different way and a different way of scoring, but I'm just curious if we know how we stack up against Aberdeen, Brookings.
Go ahead. Do you want to answer that?
Yes, that's another great point that, aside from any assessment or stormwater utilities, just out of curiosity to see where their monies are going, where their dollars are being spent, how many dollars does Aberdeen spend on street improvements. I think there's a lot of good detailed analysis that we could continue to perform here to have some a little more educated discussion on this. I wanted to bring it forth tonight just on the heels of these bid awards and plant some seeds for the discussion to grow, at least to continue the discussion. We're not quite prepared yet at all, obviously, with having specifics as far as how much revenue that would generate, how much additional street work we could get done with that revenue or things like that. But definitely would look into those components further with the other communities and see what kind of effect they've had.
We hired IMS to do our pavement management study in 2016, and this is what they do. And they've done them all over the country. And they told us at that time that we're definitely above average as far as our road conditions go. And even, I mean, everybody thinks that their roads are bad because they see their potholes. Everybody has potholes. And as a general comment about our community is, that they made was, we're in good shape. And a lot of communities across the country would be very jealous to have our pavement conditions that we have. And we do spend a lot more money on maintaining our pavement than a lot of communities do. Councilman Roby?
Well, Bruce asks an interesting question, and I will just tell you in my discussions, I haven't talked with one South Dakotan who's happy with the roads in their city. So also just another comment, and then I'll ask for your response, is when we bid jobs, like we saw a couple of bids come through, only one responder, that's always a kind of a yellow flag. I've talked with people about this, and we could budget 3 times as much money to fix roads, but there's a sweet spot in there, because if we put too many projects out, there's not enough contractors in the area to bid those. So there's a little bit of the strategies involved in what you can get bid, because we can have people come from 4 states away, but we're going to pay heavily for it. So how do you manage that bidding and getting the right amount of contractors involved?
Yeah, that's a great question, Councilman Roby. The bidding environment here in Watertown, we are regionally constrained to the availability of certain types of contractors. And those that perform roadway work and asphalt paving are one of those areas that we're a little bit limited in, and hence the sole bids on a few of these projects. Now, some ways you can manage that is looking to, the economy of scale. If you were to include multiple projects and you start to grow those quantities to a level to where, maybe some outside, a little bit further outside the region that we're drawing from now, not necessarily out of state or 2 states away, but just a little bit bigger footprint of a region, you can start to turn some heads and draw a little bit of attention that way too, once those quantities grow. Now, when you're dealing with asphalt paving specifically, there are rare occasions where the state might have a huge asphalt paving project and they've got a mobilized plant set up remotely for that highway work. Those companies will then often look at those communities around them and look to bid local work as well while they're there with their mobilized plant. That, I don't know as though that's happened in the recent future or recent past here. But definitely things we would look at considering and calling those contractors to help foster some bids. That's one way you can approach that. But the other conflict I was going to mention, that when you run into, particularly with asphalt paving, the distance. We could have Brookings contractors bid on this, but you're kind of getting to the edge of the limits of where you want to be hauling hot asphalt from in order for it to be effectively be laid down and paved in our community. And so those are things we have to balance too and keep in mind as well. But it's a tough task to perform, but we try to keep our eye on all these items and be diligent in who we're making contact with and other projects in the region that are going on.
Yeah. All right, well, we're not done talking about this topic. It'll come back many times, I'm sure, but we should keep moving on the agenda. We would like to talk about the Highway 212 Phase 2 Traffic Impact Study. And so, Heath, if you want to stay put or you want to go back over, but that's your game.
I will stay put. Was one item of follow-up, if I could, Mayor?
Sure.
Do we need to further discuss the potential additional work on whether we're going to entertain allocating unreserved fund balances towards those projects?
Are you looking for action? I thought that was...
Or recommendation on a direction to move in.
Okay. All right, we can move backwards, back up a little bit, and go back to that chart.
One of the options with Northridge additional work would be to that $189,000. That number is a straight calculation based on the bids we have from Northridge. We know these two additional streets, 7th and 17th, a portion of 17th, would cost this much to plug them into the current contract through a change order. That is one way we could proceed with that option, is to issue a change order, because we have known itemized bids and bid pricing for the same work on these other streets. So we're under our legal realm of the possibility to just plug this in as a change order. The issue becomes that's an additional cost that we have to allocate funds from the unreserved fund balance, and Kristen or the mayor can talk more in depth about that. The other option on that project is that we could swap out 2 other streets that maybe aren't in as bad of condition as these 2 are, and change order these streets in and change order out the ones that we feel are in a little bit better condition but still need repaired. So there's kind of 2 options we were sitting on with that first project.
Or a combination, somewhere in between. The issue I have is a substantial increase in our budget, and we agonized over how to balance the budget last year, and then just to add another $500,000 to what we had set aside for road repairs is it's a pretty big stretch. And if the council isn't ready to make that much of a leap, we could just replace out 7th Street. You can see, if you bring that picture back up, that road was overlaid just 6 years ago. The pavement should not have failed. The pavement was originally laid, and Rob, you might know better than I do, when Northridge was originally early constructed, maybe 19 years ago, original construction. We should now be looking at overlaying it. But when you see the overlay, it's already overlaid. Overlay should have extended the life 15 years or more. What we're seeing, that type of failure, tells me this road has some issues. You can't just put a new mat on it because the base is failing. This is a fatigue failure, which is caused by too much flex in a flexible road. And when the base is soft, the road flexes too much when you drive over it. And asphalt does flex a little bit, and it's designed to, but if you flex it too much, it fails in these little box shapes. And, you know, we can't expect a different result. This road needs to be reconstructed. We can't just remove the asphalt and put new asphalt back, or 6 years from now we'll be doing the same thing again.
Yeah.
And so we're talking about draining it from below with the drains. And that adds cost to the project. We're also talking about putting fabric in, which is keeps that base course from mixing with the subgrade below, and allows the road to last a little bit longer. I think if we see this kind of road, and what happens if we don't do a full replacement this year? Well, we drive over an icky road for another season. Is that the end of the world? Well, probably not. I mean, the PCI is probably down there in the 40 range. And we'd like it to be 60 or higher, but it's not 20. You know, it can get worse, and it doesn't compound the amount of work we have to do it. It's not like a road where if we overlay it, we can prevent having to fully reconstruct it. If we get the overlay done, or the crack seal, or the chip seal, or the surface treatment, which will extend the life of the road, we're beyond that. These roads are gone, and they can't be resuscitated. They need to be reconstructed. And so I think letting them go another year will irritate the property owners that drive on it, but really, that is an option. That's an option that the council can consider. It's, you know, we made a decision. We knew it was recommended we should put 3.6 million. We didn't. We put 2.4, which, you know, is going to keep us on the average about where we are, and we have bad roads. Some of our roads are bad. Last year we rebuilt some, and they're good now. So these are getting worse. It's all a matter. You have options, so that's something to consider very carefully. Councilman Danforth?
Personally, having, especially the 17th Avenue Northeast area, there are a lot of streets that are like this up there. And I will tell you that I get a lot of comments, and I have for several years, from the people that live up in those areas, and they're not happy. And I don't blame them for not being happy. You know, we talked about, Heath, and Mayor, you talked about how we've had discussions since 2009 about having these additional assessments, and yet we don't. We end up not going there. And the one thing I know that I've heard during my time on the council, as well as hearing it from people, is, yeah, I'll pay more for good streets, but I want you to prioritize properly within your budgeting process first. You know, you do hear that. They don't automatically want an assessment. They want us budgeting effectively, which may mean, in some people's opinions, that we don't do other things. But there are a lot of roads that look like that right side picture up there in that whole area up there. It's bad. You know,
Well, and it's not just this neighborhood. We have roads like this all over town. And, I mean, I don't know what the pavement condition index, how this compares to other roads. I think a graphic would be helpful, just to see how many roads do we have that look like that? Like, what are we talking about? It would be awesome to just take and, you know, fix them all in 1 year. But would we even find the contractors to do that? What, you know, how many millions of dollars would it take to eliminate all of our roads that are below 50 on the pavement condition index? That's just not feasible. We're going to have roads like this that remain, and they're going to be all over town in different neighborhoods. And I think, you know, really it comes down to what commitment does the council want to place toward rehabilitating roads? And we've made that call. It's 2 point whatever million, and you know, to jump now and go over 3, you know, it is kind of out of order. So, but definitely we need it. Colin?
I just want to point out, you kind of see in the distance, there's some cones set up on both these pictures. There are big blowouts in that area. I drove around with Kelly and Rob to look at these areas. Rob had his crews try to go and fix it temporarily, but this is kind of how we determine these were emergency roads to fix. Is we're having huge blowouts. 7th Street in particular, you drive over it, there's water coming up. You could point to a lot of other roads that are in similar condition, but that's how we kind of came to the conclusion on these specific roads.
Well, and we wouldn't want to go completely outside, away from where we're doing work this year. These were selected because they're relatively near to other projects where we're already mobilizing. So,
yeah. Madam Mayor, if I could just, in my closing comments regarding this additional work, either one of these subdivisions, for the reasons Colin mentioned, that's why we felt it was our due diligence to bring it forward to the council as a whole, so you guys were aware of it. You know, I'm not saying that this has to be done this year, you know, do or die. I do realize that we're dealing with unreserved fund balance, and that's a lot of money to do one or both or a portion of either one of these. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, and so that's why, you know, at least bring it forward to the council's attention and letting you folks decide if it were appropriate to draw from any of the unreserved fund balance. And I don't know if Kristen would speak any more to that. She keeps closer tabs on that fund than I do, and has a higher level of comfort in talking about that from a city management standpoint, from the finances of the city.
Kristen?
I can say a few things. It looks like for 2018, we're probably going to end the year with about 4.1 million unreserved fund balance. The projections off of 19's budget is to probably be more around 3.1 to end 19 about there. As far as the level of comfort, we like to keep about our 3 months of operating. Actually, we like to keep a little bit more than that, but that's kind of the level where we're supposed to be, which would put us around 2.1. So we're currently, our unreserved fund balance continues to go down, and we, it makes me a little cautious to add, this amount of value. It's a tough call to make. The other thing that I think we're experiencing in our capital improvement fund is not only does it have to do our street improvements, but we have a lot of our current debt comes out of there. It's around almost 40% right off the top goes towards our debt payments. So not only is our street and some of our public safety improvements and a few of our other projects having to fight for that, the debt is taking that up. So that is a concern. Do I think our unreserved fund balance could hold these two projects? Yeah, at this time they could hold it, but then our concern is as we go into 2020's budget, what's going to happen with that? And that's in talking with Heath, Collin, the mayor as well. That's where I think the discussion has went towards more of that assessment because, with our capital improvement fund, its only source of revenue is the sales tax. That is our only source that's coming into that. So like I said, anytime it's fighting the debt, debt comes first and projects come second. So that is what we're currently kind of seeing, and I think it's what's happened. We've, over the last couple of years, we've had $30 million worth of debt for great projects, but in return, this is kind of where we're seeing the crunch. So do I think we could take this on right now? Yeah, but knowing going into 2020's budget, there might be a little bit less to draw from. So.
All right. Councilman Danforth.
The one thing that we do is we have a tendency to look at these things, any one of these things that come before us on an isolated individual basis. And I know I'll speak for myself. Where I lose sight of it is the decisions that we made a month or 2 months ago or 3 months ago where we had to supplement something. So it would be helpful from my standpoint, anytime we ever have these conversations about potentially supplementing our budget, to know what we've done historically within our current budget year so that we can look at it and say, well, we've already done this, this, and this, and maybe there's some offsets to that if bids are coming in great or whatever it is. But to solely look at the dollars and the notion of supplementing that, it's a great idea. But I got to have the right tools to know what we've done historically in order to know whether that's a good idea.
Kristen, would you comment, please?
Yeah, and the one thing I will say is that's one area that I'm trying to get where, sometimes we do, as you said, we throughout the year talk about the things we're going to supplement. That's why on the agenda tonight you will see one of the budget supplements coming before you, which is some of the things that we have agreed to do up until this point. So the capital improvement fund tonight you'll be approving to supplement $123,500, and that was for some of the other projects and kind of unbudgeted items that do happen. So I will try to continue to do that as we get to that point. But that is very true. Sometimes it's easier to say when you see one thing in front of you, but not to see the whole picture. So.
Yeah, I agree. Councilman Albertson?
Maybe just to move that along, maybe it's wise for you guys. You said that there were a couple of places that may not be as bad as 17th, so maybe you need to come back and just say, I guess we aren't going to take money out, so are there places that are really not as bad as 17th looks bad, but I know there are a lot of bad streets, so maybe you can look at what you're going to plan on doing and substitute this.
Thank you, Councilman Albertson. Yeah, that's definitely one of the options that we could move forward in that direction, of course, agreeably with the council, and make do with the budget we have for this project. And we've already looked ahead to think there are probably 2 streets that are in a slightly better condition than these 2 up in the Northridge addition that we could change order out. There were some logistics in doing that with the design, the redesign that we would have to perform to get these 2 plugged in, which would have to be done with adding these as new work as well. And then the design for the old work that we swapped out, we would still have on the shelf to perform later. But there are some logistics we would have to carry out in any which way we go here.
All right, Councilman Vilhauer?
Again, appreciating where you guys are coming from, but also looking at, I mean, staff and we as a council spend a lot of time each year going through our budget for the next year. Personally, I'm not ready to start making some whole-scale changes. I realize a budget is not an ironclad document, but I also believe it is something that we do need to try to follow as best we can. That's why I guess I'm looking for some other options potentially versus looking at making some substantive changes to what we passed for a 2019 budget.
Yeah. Councilman Danforth?
Should we be looking at our budget and where we have allocated dollars? It may not even be in road construction. It might be in something else that we planned, and see where does that priority fit now, knowing that we have something like this in front of us. You know, it's possible that there's something that really isn't a need, it's a want maybe, that maybe that has to get delayed a year or 2 years or something. Those are they come out of the same pot, so I think we have to seriously take a look at what we budgeted for and make sure that our priorities are straight.
I think that Heath did do that, and I mean, they were looking in all the nooks and crannies for ways, and that's where they came up with the storm sewer projects, just not doing them. We found several $100,000.
We looked in other departments, or just within
the whole 212. Yeah. And, I mean, we don't need to decide right this minute.
No.
But, you know, we do need to keep moving along. Do you want to
Absolutely.
postpone the?
Yeah, we can. Let's do that. We'll move forward, and we can just move forward with these. I do sense the concern, which I have myself, of allocating unreserved funds towards this, and by all means, we can move forward with these projects as bid and plug these in for next year's work. That is an option on the table that I would support and follow through with as well. So if we could bring this up as an old business item at the next meeting, just to follow up, and I could try to have a little bit more information on streets we could change out and how those numbers fall into play, and move forward in that direction at this point.
I think that's good. Good
Great.
plan.
Great.
Yeah, thank you. And then the traffic impact study, can we move that to the next meeting, or is there a critical thing you need to tell the council tonight?
There is not. I could give a 2-minute summary on where that's at if you'd like, or just postpone the entire
Let's
presentation.
postpone it.
Okay.
And see, is there any other old business that anyone needs to bring up? Or any new business?
Mayor,
Who said that? Yes, Councilman Albertson.
I had talked to Jay. We went to that ash tree, and Jay had said that he could very quickly just tell us what's happening or what the city has already in mind for that. I think those that were there were very concerned about that. So the emerald ash beetle, and I don't know if we have a, Jay, can you do what you told me in a minute or two?
He can try.
If that
And
is
why don't
okay.
you just give us as brief of an overview as you can, and then if we want it on another agenda, we can put it on there. I know we've been talking about this a lot behind the scenes, and yes. Okay. Jay DeLange, Park and Rec Director.
When the emerald ash borer arrived in South Dakota last summer, everybody became very concerned in the state, and, as are we in Watertown. We have a lot of ash trees, probably 35% of the trees, public trees in the community are ash, and one of the first things we want to put an emerald ash borer plan together. One of the first things you have to do is a tree inventory. And we've talked to various software businesses, but Spencer was talking to me the other day. We have, what is it, ArcGIS, Pete? Yep. We have that we could implement a tree inventory into that. That's the one that keeps an eye on our signs and fire hydrants and that type of thing. We could put another layer for a tree inventory on it, and basically what we would need would be probably an iPad, which would be $500 to $600. And if we could find the people, we could get going on this tree inventory, because we'll have to do a complete inventory so we know exactly what we got before we can put a plan together on how to take care of things. So came about quickly, but it is kind of a plan that would be relatively inexpensive and very effective, I think. So,
yeah, that's great. And I have heard that we might have a resource for people. So
I did talk to Dr. Ball after that meeting and asked him if he had any students that were still looking for jobs, if we could find somebody like that. And I do plan to talk a little more with the master gardeners.
Yep, very good. Okay, thank you, Jay. We have no reason to go into executive session. Was there any other new business other than that? So I will look for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Manti and second by Vilhauer. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. And we'll take a 5-minute break and come back for the council meeting.